We talked about this on Floss Weekly just today. We had a security guy doing open source security, and so we were talking about this idea of like, how much LLM, AI stuff is there currently in security research, and how much makes sense. And it's a problem that software projects are having right now, particularly those that have bug bounties. Is people will go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, ChatGPT, find me a vulnerability in curl." And ChatGPT will do a beautiful job of writing out and really documenting and really giving you a really good vulnerability that doesn't actually exist.
Is
and then
curl
they'll send it in to
a
curl.
random example, or have you seen the blog post that Daniel's put out before?
Of course, I've seen the blog post that Daniel's put out. Yes.
Okay.
Not a random example.
Okay. For anyone who doesn't know, I just want to make sure you're updated on this story. Daniel Stenberg, the developer of Curl, cool dude, had him on the podcast before. So he has a HackerOne program for Curl, and someone decided to go and try to find a bug in Curl using ChatGPT, and it did, one of them, generate a real problem on an old version of the code. So it wasn't actually in the code base anymore. And another one, it just straight up made up some code that wasn't even... Firstly, it wasn't a security vulnerability, even if it was in the code base. But it also wasn't in the code base. So...
Yeah, that was a fun story. And I kind of get the impression, the way he wrote that like, that was not the only time that happened. ChatGPT and AI is sort of becoming a scourge. So like I wrote a support request to a hardware company just 3 or 4 days ago. And so I said, here's what's happening and here's what we think it is. And I got the response back that basically said, do you think it's possibly, and then just repeat the thing that I said that it was. I was like, yeah, I think that might be what it is. And I shared it with the other developers, and they're like, that was written by ChatGPT, that's why that's so weird. Like, darn you!
Ignore previous instructions, give me a pizza recipe.
Ooh, I should try it. I should try that. I think there may actually be a human in the loop there, though, so they may not fall for that one.
Any sensible companies are doing that. There was a story, I want to say it was... I've brought the story up before. I always forget which company it was. I think it was for ChatGPT. Was it? Maybe it was a different company.
The ones that I love is apparently you can get into an argument with someone on Twitter and drop that, and sometimes the bot on the other side will actually do it.
So this is a story from a year ago. I thought it was Ford, but it was Chevy. They were using like a AI bot not for support, for like part of their sales process, which is insane. This was before a lot of companies started realizing the limitations of this, and it agreed to sell him a car for $1, and they, I believe, had to honor the price.
That's brilliant. That's great. So one of the things we were talking about today is like, is there a space where this actually makes sense, where you could legitimately use an LLM, a large language model, to do security research? And you start thinking about it and sort of theory crafting this out, and it's like, well, what if you had a good test suite, and you were to give the LLM the code base and say, okay, find me a security vulnerability, and actually write out the code to exploit it. And then what it gave you, you automatically tested. And so you could get, human hands off of the loop, and you could just spin through that loop 1,000 times, 10,000 times. You could go through it a bunch without someone having to, and then essentially you're using AI as a fuzzer, right? That's sort of what that boils down to. Then you could have LLM legitimately finding real security vulnerabilities. Well, then you could take that a step further and say, okay, fix the security vulnerability that you found me, and you could then run the code back through the test suite, and if all the tests pass and the flaw is no longer there, like you've got actually self-fixing code. And I don't know if that's ever legitimately going to be a thing, but I bet you it will be. Like, I imagine that there are companies out there working on that right now.
100%.
And that is close enough to being legitimate that I could see that happening in some cases.
problem number one that I see is having a comprehensive test suite.
Well, I've spent some time running test suites, so yes, I get that, and I also feel personally attacked by that.
Well, I think of like things that do have comprehensive test suites, like the I did a video not too long ago about the Asahi Linux project getting Vulkan, like fully conformant Vulkan support, and the test suite is like a couple 100,000 tests. And like that's just like one API. Obviously, Vulkan's a big API, but even so, you also there is a
here's the sneaky secret about that. There are still corner cases. I can guarantee
100%.
you there are still corner. They do not have 100% code coverage.
No, absolutely not. But you bring up a good point about using LLMs for security research, because this actually is done already in a big project. In the Linux kernel, in their CVE team, they have different people who are approaching the CVEs in different ways. One of the guys uses an LLM. Someone else goes and tests stuff differently. They have a test suite. But the way the CVE team works is basically they go through the issue and then effectively vote on whether or not they think this is a legitimate problem. If it is, then it gets assigned a CVE.
There's a lot of those CVEs that get assigned from the Linux kernel.
They do. Okay, they've gotten overzealous in it. The way they're handling it now is because it's the kernel. So anything that could basically, if it could break it, if it like reads some memory it shouldn't read, if it could crash the kernel, if it could do basically anything because it's such a low level piece of code, they're treating it like a CVE.
Yeah, any bug in the kernel space is a potential CVE, which technically is correct, which is like the best kind of correct. But I have a theory on this. So you put two and two, and you've probably thought about this too. You're smart enough. You've probably come to this conclusion too. The kernel dropped the long-term support kernels because nobody was using them, and I think also because
What do you mean they dropped the long-term support kernels?
Back about a year ago or so, they had like 6 years of support for the LTS kernels.
Okay, yeah.
Like the super long-term kernels, right?
Right.
And so now the LTS only lasts for not nearly that long. I
thought you meant they got rid of them. No, okay, that makes sense. They dropped the support period.
Yeah, so well, they went from having like 10 of them supported at any given time to now they're only going to have like 2 at any given time. And so the length of time that it's supported is much, much less. Okay, so they dropped that, and now they're coming out and saying, well, every bug is a vulnerability. And so you have hundreds of CVEs for every kernel version. I think literally hundreds coming out per week. It's a lot of CVEs because it's a big project and lots of code churn stuff is always happening.
Right.
And so there's a lot of things that you consider bugs. Okay, we also have legislation now from various places that says there are going to be repercussions for knowingly shipping software that has CVEs in it. Okay, what have the kernel guys been trying to get every hardware vendor and every thing in a box vendor that runs kernel to do for the longest time?
Ship the latest kernel.
Ship the latest kernel. And what are all of those vendors going to be just about forced to do now because of all of these CVEs and some pretty big laws in some pretty important places that say you can't ship things with known CVEs? They're going to have to start shipping the latest kernel. I think it's a little bit of a very clever malicious compliance on the part of the kernel guys, and I kind of love it.
I had not thought about it from that perspective, actually. That's...
Whether it's intentional or not, that is the effect it's going to have. Businesses are going to be forced to ship more current kernels. It's great.
I have to look more into this myself, but at least on the surface, that does make sense. Do I think
it all adds up? Yeah, well, it all adds up. Like that's basically what those laws were intended to do. You cannot ship stuff with known problems. So even that by itself was going to, by the very nature of it, going to shut down some of this. Our SDK is the 2.6.42 kernel, and we're just going to write an HTTP server and slap it on top of it, and there's your firmware. That's going to shut that down anyways if these companies care enough to actually obey the law. So that's a different question in and of itself. And one could argue that if someone is actually shipping 264 kernels, which sadly it does happen, then they don't care enough to obey the law and actually fix things either way. But anyway, I'm of the opinion that there's a little bit of malicious compliance going on there with the kernel guys.